This episode originally aired on January 31st, 2021. How can you truly scale your company if it suffers from obscurity? Well, the short answer is it takes visibility and lots of it. Hi, I'm 𝗟𝗟𝗶𝘀, and you're about to hear from the person the New York Times describes as an expert at self-reinvention. She's going to share with us her tried, tested, and proven method for not only increasing your company's visibility through organic means, but also how to break through to becoming the company that everybody's talking about, which can lead to another dilemma. What happens when your visibility goes into overdrive? Do you have the business infrastructure to support it? You're about to find out. Let's start the show.
Welcome to Business Infrastructure, the podcast about curing back office blues of fast-growing businesses. If you're a business owner or operator looking for practical tips and solutions to scaling your business in a sustainable manner, you're in the right place. Now here's your hostess, 𝗟𝗟𝗶𝘀.
Today's episode is brought to you by 𝗟𝗶𝘶 Incorporated. Scale your fast-growing business with less pain by hiring the right people, implementing the right processes, and leveraging the right technologies. Learn more at 𝗟𝗶𝘁'𝗀𝗋systems.com. That's 𝗟𝗶𝘁'𝗀𝗋systems.com. This season, we are focusing on scaling for the big league, and I am super excited about our guest today. World-renowned strategy coach, consultant, best-selling author, and so much more as you're going to hear about throughout the course of this episode, Dorie Clark. And Dorie is joining us from the Big Apple, New York City. Now, let me say this really quickly. If you aren't ready to take notes, then I suggest you press the pause button right now, go grab your physical or your digital notebook, and then press play again, because we are about to go to the School of Scale with Dorie. And Dorie is recognized as one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. She's also an adjunct professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, as well as she's also an adjunct professor at the 𝗖𝗄 Business School in Spain, 𝗖cie Paris, and more. You're going to hear me probably saying and more quite a bit as I talk about all of Dorie's accomplishments and awards over the years. So without any further ado, Dorie, it is truly an honor to have you here with us today. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I am great, and I'm so glad to be here with you, 𝗟𝗟. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Dorie, I have two confessions to make before we really get into our conversation. So number one, I have been cyber stalking you for a while as a fan, not as a stan.
So you can tell me how beautiful my cats are. That's okay. I'll take it.
So I want to be clear about that part, right? And honestly, it's because your name has come up in so many conversations that I've had with people that I really respect and admire. People like Ron Carucci and Liz Kislick, Meredith Moore, and our mutual friend, Marie and Contreras. And the second confession is I really struggled with how and where to begin with this subject of scaling because your contribution to this topic alone is so vast. And you have such a fascinating background. So I was wondering if we could actually first start with a Cliff Notes version of how you went from growing up in a small town in North Carolina to becoming a presidential campaign spokesperson on to being recognized as the #1 communications coach in the world. Dorie, take it away.
Oh my goodness. I'll see if I can do a suitably fast and non-boring Cliff Notes
it won't
version.
be boring. It will not be boring. I know that for sure.
Well, I think the very quick version is, as you mentioned, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, which was not my favorite place. It was, there was not a lot going on there. And especially after as a teenager, realized I was gay, I thought, you know what, I'm going to get out of here. And so I just decided to hightail it. And so I came up with a plan. There was a early college entrance program at Mary Baldwin College, now Mary Baldwin University in Virginia. And so I did that. I entered college when I was 14. Was there for 2 years, transferred to Smith College in Massachusetts, where I graduated. And then I went to divinity school. I got a master's in theological studies from Harvard.
Wow.
And after that, I basically didn't have a lot of luck with jobs in my 20s because I kept getting laid off from things. I was a newspaper reporter and I got laid off. And then I worked on some high profile political campaigns, on a governor's race and on a presidential race as the press secretary. And both of my candidates lost. So I was trying to kind of figure things out and find my way. And I ended up as a nonprofit executive director for a couple of years for a small bicycling advocacy nonprofit. And I had this kind of revelation while I was there one day where I realized suddenly that running a nonprofit, this is not news to anyone who actually runs a nonprofit, but I thought, oh my God, running a nonprofit is the same thing as running a business. And then I immediately thought, wait, well, I should run my own business. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 15 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So if you had to identify a central theme across acquiring this Master of Divinity at Harvard, working as a journalist or as a press secretary, and then as a director at a nonprofit, what would that central theme be, Dorie?
Well, there are things that I always have liked to do. I like writing, I like speaking, I like ideas, but mostly it's, I think in terms of the arc of my career, it was really, I think mostly trying to do something that seemed like a plausible bet where I would get to do the things that I wanted to do, failing or somehow being shut down in the process and just saying, well, I guess I have to find something else.
Now what?
Yeah,
but I love
exactly.
how you've had these seemingly very different careers and how you've been able to just basically, and I know this is something that you definitely talk about, you have been able to reinvent yourself and move on to the next, whatever the next thing was in your professional journey. Speaking of which, you mentioned starting your own business. So did you start a consulting firm or what did it look like when you first started your own company?
Well, I think for a lot of us, when we get started originally, the initial conception of our business is not necessarily how it plays out over time. So I definitely pivoted. Originally, when I started my business, my first thought was that I would actually do political consulting because the highest profile work that I had done up to that point was be a spokesperson on a presidential campaign. And I thought, oh, okay, I can leverage this and I can get work doing political consulting. But when I started, when I launched, for whatever reason, I mean, maybe it was the point it was in the cycle or just bad luck, I was not getting any political candidates. And, I was like, oh man, no one's hiring me here as a consultant. But to my surprise, what was happening was a lot of other people that I knew, typically people who were running other nonprofits or government agencies or things like that. They were reaching out and saying, oh, hey, we hear you're consulting now. Can you work for us? And I may not have been clever enough to have figured out initially that they would be good clients, but I at least was not dumb enough that I would turn away their money. So I said, sure, I can help. And that's sort of how my business originally started. And so the first thing that I really did for money for several years was do marketing and communications and PR, primarily for nonprofits and government agencies and a little bit of corporate work.
Now, speaking of marketing and communications, it's so tempting, and this is something we talk about quite a bit on this podcast, is the the choice that so many people feel they have to make when it comes to operations or marketing, I should say, versus operations. So obviously, marketing is extremely important for every business because if no one knows about your products or your services, obviously you will not have a business. But on the flip side, Dorie, what good does it do you to bring that type of visibility to your company and to your company's products and services if you don't have the operational or business infrastructure, as we call it here, to be able to deliver on the promises that are attached to those products and services? So I'm wondering if we could kind of switch gears a bit and really take a deep dive into the marketing, personal branding, and communications, and also talk about strategy, because I know that's also something that you are an expert at. Now, I know you've provided keynote speeches and you've consulted with some of the largest organizations in the world, including the World Bank, Google, and the IMF. So you clearly have seen and know what it takes to scale. I mean, you're actually the embodiment of that in and of yourself. But it seems as though if we had to talk about a path of getting the path to scaling, it seems that it has to start with first building your authority as well as your visibility. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I've certainly thought about this a lot in terms of my own career and the consultants or coaches that I advise or who are now part of my recognized expert community. But the same principles very much apply at an enterprise level. And what I have noticed is that a trap that a lot of consultants or coaches, sort of service providers fall into is if they're lucky enough to get traction in the first place, they often end up at some kind of a plateau. And it can become very frustrating to them because they are just doing more of the same. They are maxing themselves out. There's, okay, great. I've got product market fit. So people are hiring me for this thing. Okay, I want to raise my revenue, so I'll do more of that thing. But eventually they hit operational constraints. In this particular case, it is their time and their ability to deliver. Although, for a company of whatever sort, it might be what the factory can produce or what your staff is able to do. So they hit this constraint. And even if they're able to somehow get smarter or more efficient about how they're doing it, first of all, that's just kind of around the edges. That's not a fundamental shift. But also, when you think about future client growth, if you are only operating on a referral basis, if you don't really have a high profile, it's just the people who know you like you. The problem is that it's not always the case, but most times the people who you're working with know other people like themselves. And so if you are doing work in a certain band of pricing or in a certain industry, you're going to get more of that. It's really hard to level up from there because people are just going to send you to people like themselves. And so that is why if you really want to break through and scale, certainly if you are a consultant, if you're an executive coach, if you are some kind of a service provider, what I suggest, and there are very much parallels in all kinds of businesses, is that you have to change the dynamics. You can no longer afford to go from one to one. You have to go one to many, which is why you have to raise your profile through building your platform as a recognized expert. You have to start sharing content. You have to start making yourself visible so that new people can find you that haven't already heard of you. And that is what enables you to, it may not show results for a long time, but that is what enables you over time to break in with a new, higher, better echelon of customers that will pay you better and help you achieve what you want. And similarly for any kind of business, there's only so far you can go when your marketing is essentially one-to-one referrals from customers. You have to find a way to scale your impact. This is something I talk about a lot in my book, Stand Out, is that there is a progression from one-to-one to then one-to-many when you're able, through your marketing, it doesn't have to be paid marketing either. It could be organic, but you're able to reach many people. And then eventually the holy grail that we are looking for is what I call many-to-many, which is that you have such an ardent fan base that other people start promoting you when you're not even in the room.
Very interesting, because you said something that I wanted to ask you about anyway, and that is organic marketing. What do you consider to be organic marketing? Because when I hear the one-to-many approach, that seems to be based on maybe organic things that you are doing. Are there other things? For example, you might join certain networking organizations. You're a part of certain professional memberships, and you may do coffee, virtual coffees now because we're still in the pandemic. But is that what you mean by the organic marketing that basically just generates this one-to-many relationship?
Yeah, basically what I'm talking about, 𝗟𝗟, is stuff that's free at a really basic level.
Okay.
I mean, as we talked about, I started my career just before launching my business as a nonprofit executive director. And so by training, I spent multiple years running this organization, and we had to be so tight-fisted with money. Any expenditure was, this horrifying thing. And so for better or for worse, the mindset and the mentality that I came out of early in my business was, okay, how can we do it for cheap? How can we do it for free? And the bad news is that perhaps you're not growing as fast as you could if you were pouring money into it. The good news is you're probably saving a lot of money, because if you're pouring money into something, most of it is going to be wasted. And so the kinds of things that business owners can do to really dramatically scale organically without paid advertising would be things like giving speeches, giving webinars. It would be writing articles for publications. It would be starting a podcast like this. It would be doing, web videos and, having a YouTube series or something like that. There's a million variations, but ultimately it's about finding a way so that larger numbers of people can discover you, so that they can stumble upon you if they haven't already heard of you before.
So if we had to think of this as almost like a flow chart or a process, Dorie, it sounds like first you have to do those things to increase your visibility, which then hopefully leads to leads. And then from that, you can hopefully start to have more conversations. And then eventually that's what leads to the money.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know. It was just starting to get good, right? Well, there's more where that came from. To listen to the full interview, be sure to click the link in the description box below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell so that you'll know when our next episode drops. Until then, keep operating smoothly.
Join us next week for another episode of Business Infrastructure with 𝗟𝗶𝘁𝗀.